Frost and Iron, A Daughters of Iron story by Joan de la Haye. Mission brief. Confidential, top secret. 2 Daughters of Iron, Team Alpha. From Jane. Regarding Human Asset Retrieval Operation Frostline. Date: the 4th of March 2036. Mission objective. Depart staging point immediately and proceed to the Siberian Federal Research Penal Facility, designation redacted. Locate and extract the assigned human asset alive. Deliver the asset to secondary transport at the designated rendezvous coordinates. The asset is classified as non-cooperative, but cognitively intact. Preservation of mental function is mandatory. If extraction is loud, escalation is inevitable. If extraction is quiet, containment remains possible. Avoid attribution. Secondary objective. Do not trigger a full facility lockdown prior to asset acquisition. If a lockdown occurs, containment of the asset takes precedence over all other objectives. You are not authorized to negotiate contract terms on site. If the asset resists extraction, adapt accordingly. Known parameters. Facility overview. Hybrid penal research installation operating under restricted federal authority. Official records are incomplete by design. Expect legacy infrastructure integrated with modern surveillance systems. Security presence. Armed guards trained for containment, not pursuit. Internal routing prioritizes denial over engagement. External response time estimated at 12 to 18 minutes post-confirmation. Surveillance and control systems, layered visual, thermal, and biometric monitoring. Manual overrides prevalent. AI assistance present, but constrained by human supervisory logic. Treat the system as procedural, not intelligent. Asset profile. Male, estimated early to mid-60s. Long-term confinement. No current digital identity. Designated cognitive specialist by the client. Compliance should not be assumed. Plan accordingly. Operational context. The client has requested minimal disturbance to facility operations. Interpretation of minimal remains at your discretion. This contract was structured to prevent traceable data persistence. If documentation appears incomplete, assume that it's intentional. Climate conditions, AO weather, Siberia, March. Short version, winter is loosening its grip. That makes everything less stable. Temperature and environment, -18 degrees Celsius to -35 degrees Celsius ambient. Daytime thaw possible, refreeze after sunset. Wind chill regularly exceeds -40 degrees Celsius. Snow and ground conditions, compacted snow with surface melt. Ice crust prone to collapse under load. Interior icing common near vents, machinery, and traffic zones. Visibility, extended daylight hours. Severe glare during clear conditions. Flat light and low contrast under cloud cover. Systems impact, battery degradation remains severe. Actuators vulnerable during freeze-thaw cycles. Optics affected by glare and ice bloom. Drone endurance marginal in high wind. Tactical notes: do not trust footing after dusk. Expect refreeze-related system failures. Cold injuries escalate faster during wind exposure. Winter is not finished. It's just changing tactics. Payment. 140,000 corporate credits upon confirmed delivery of the asset. A 20% hazard bonus has been approved due to environmental severity and restricted AO access. Client will not renegotiate. Notes. Operate via ghost feed node only. Auto burn enabled. No data retention beyond mission close. AVA. Language and regional familiarity noted. Remain objective. Jess, facility walls are load-bearing. Act accordingly. Maggie, do not improve the system. Break only what you must. Cold will not wait for you.
Neither will the client.
End of brief. File ID, Daughters of Iron, Alpha 01, 4 March 2036, clearance Sigma Red, encrypted via Ghostfeed Protocol version 3.1. Chapter 1 Drop. Cold kills first.
The hangar in northern Finland wasn't warm.
It was simply less hostile than if they'd been standing outside, exposed to the frigid temperatures. Whether inside or out, they were still freezing their asses off, no matter how many layers of winter gear they wore. Frost traced the steel ribs overhead, pale veins creeping where the heaters gave up first. The air smelled of fuel, lubricant, and something mineral, cold iron exposed too long to the open. Every breath stung, sound carried too easily in the frozen air. The VTOL squatted at the center of the bay, engines dark, its metallic skin already dusted with snow. Ava stood at the open cargo ramp, helmet tucked under one arm, eyes on the aircraft's undercarriage, assessing. The way she always did before an op, making sure their gear and whatever transport was assigned was completely operational. She didn't completely trust the AI-operated drones. Or people. Experience had taught her better. Jess flexed her hands inside her gloves, feeling for stiffness.
This place is bullshit, she said. It's just waiting to turn on us. It'll turn on us once we cross the border, Maggie replied, voice flat as she worked a diagnostic pad.
Her breath fogged the screen before the anti-fog coating caught up.
Comms are already sulking, and the satellite bounce is moody.
Ava glanced back.
You sound surprised. I'm offended, Maggie said. I expected hostility. This is passive-aggressive.
Jane's voice cut in cleanly over comms, unbothered by the cold.
Team Alpha status.
Gear sealed. Systems nominal. VTOL integrity within tolerance, Ava answered.
Cold tolerance?
Jane asked. Jess snorted softly. Ava didn't.
We'll manage. There was a pause on the line.
They could practically hear her calculating.
Staging window closes in 3 minutes, Jane said. Once you lift, assume no return route. You know the brief.
They did.
Right.
Maggie snapped the pad shut and slung her pack over one shoulder.
Time to freeze our tits and everything else off.
Fabulous. Ava stepped onto the ramp as the VTOL's engines began to spin, a low, hungry whine that vibrated up through the deck and into her bones.
The sound filled the hangar and pushed back the quiet. Cold degrades everything. I suggest you get a move on.
Jane's voice crackled through the comms again.
The ramp started to rise.
Ava lifted her flight helmet, sealed it with a practiced twist and said, already moving.
The hangar doors peeled open.
White light flooded in as the temperature dropped a few more degrees, enough to matter. As the VTOL lifted, Finland fell away beneath them. Siberia waited. Inside the cabin, the heaters worked overtime and still lost ground. Cold pressed in through the hull, seeping into seams, biting at exposed metal. Jess strapped in, weapons locked, boots braced.
I wonder, she said to no one in particular, if this thing stalled, would we feel it?
Or would we just stop being warm and then hit the ground very, very fast? Maggie didn't look up from her console.
That's a lovely image.
Thanks for that. The border came and went, without ceremony. No challenge ping. No handover signal. Just a quiet degradation in everything that depended on someone, somewhere, answering back. Airspace confirmation never came through, Maggie said, glancing up from her screen.
No error, no retry. That's consistent with ghost routing.
Ava nodded once. Jane's file pinged into their feed, same brief, different emissions. Names redacted. Facility designation stripped back to coordinates and threat bands. Jess scrolled.
So we're pulling a ghost out of a hole that officially doesn't exist. This should be fun. Don't forget the alive part, Maggie added. And cognitively intact, whatever that's supposed to mean. And what's really fantastic, he's probably not going to cooperate.
So we've got the weather trying to kill us, the facility security, and an asset who's going to fight us every step of the bloody way.
Which is why we're earning the big bucks on this one, Jess said with a grin. I've got plans.
Ava was still reading and tuned Jess and Maggie out. The file, like the job, was thin on details. No face. No baseline. No intake photo. Just dates, classifications, and the absence of mistakes.
Original intake timestamp, Ava said to the file.
There was a pause, and then the number appeared, older than it should have been. Too early for the gaps in the file. The number hung in Ava's feed, quiet and wrong. Ava leaned back, eyes on the dark beyond the cockpit glass, where Siberia waited without interest or mercy.
That meant the asset hadn't just been erased.
It meant he'd gone in under a system that didn't bother pretending people existed once they were processed.
It meant... Ava.
Maggie's voice cut across the cabin, sharper now. All business.
We're losing the approach window.
Ava looked up. The cockpit glass had gone from black to grayed chaos of cloud layers tearing past faster than they should. The VTOL shuddered, not enough to cause panic, but enough to make her notice.
Crosswinds are spiking, Maggie continued. Icing risk just jumped a category.
If we stay on this vector, we light up every sensor within 100 kilometers. Jess leaned forward in her harness.
Can we still set down? Briefly, Maggie said. Once. And then we become very expensive debris.
Jane's voice slid into the channel, calm as ever.
You're inside a tightening envelope.
VTOL loiter time is no longer advisable. Ava exhaled slowly. The unfinished thought retreated, sealed away with everything else that could wait.
Alternatives.
There was a short pause, while alternatives were calculated and discarded. Remote insertion remains viable, Jane replied.
Barely.
Jess snorted.
So what you're saying is we jump?
Maggie was already pulling up atmospheric data, numbers bleeding red at the edges.
Halo profiles ugly.
Wind shear through the mid-layer. Thermal drop faster than projected.
How ugly?
Jess asked. Maggie glanced up.
The kind where mistakes end bloody.
The VTOL jolted again, harder this time. Somewhere deep in the hull, metal complained. Ava didn't hesitate.
Prep for jump.
Harness locks disengaged. Oxygen systems came online with a hiss. The cabin temperature dropped another notch as the rear section depressurized, cold flooding in through the cabin. Jess grinned as she checked her chute.
I really hope this asset appreciates the effort. He probably won't, Maggie said, sealing her helmet. They never do. The ramp began to lower.
Wind howled into the cabin, violent and alive, clawing at them, stealing heat on contact. Beyond the edge was nothing but moving darkness and the promise of ground far, far below. Jane's voice came through one last time. Insertion window, 90 seconds.
After that, you're on your own.
Ava stepped to the edge, flight helmet locked, oxygen steady. The world below was unreadable, cloud, ice and void layered together. Cold kill first. Everything else was just timing.
Alpha, Ava said. Go.
Harness indicators flashed green.
They jumped into white.
Chapter 2, The Facility. Systems remember.
People don't.
Wind tore at Ava the second they broke cloud, the world spinning into white violence. Visibility collapsed to nothing. Her HUD flickered between altitude warnings and static, as ice began to creep along the edges of her visor.
It didn't feel like falling, more like being erased.
She forced herself to focus and flattened out, adjusting her body angle by instinct, letting training override the noise. Somewhere to her left, a green indicator flared briefly, Jess. Another blinked lower and farther back, Maggie. Good.
They were still together.
Mostly. The cold bit harder as they dropped, savage and immediate, burning through insulation. Ava felt it claw at her joints, her breath going thin despite the oxygen feed.
This wasn't the kind of cold that waited politely for mistakes. It hunted them mid-air.
The ground hidden under the storm came up too fast. "Deploy," Ava snapped. Chutes ripped open into chaos. The jolt tore the air from her lungs as the canopy fought the wind and almost lost. Ava rode the violence, steering by numbers and instinct, letting the blizzard shove her where it wanted while she fought for control, one correction at a time.
The ground slammed into her, and white exploded around her.
She hit hard, rolled, slid, and came up on one knee with her rifle already clear. Snow swallowed the sound. The world was still a screaming blur, wind howling like something alive and angry. Status lights flared in her peripheral. Jess landed 20 meters downslope, laughing breathlessly as she cut herself free.
"That was fucking epic," she said. "Let's never do it again."
Maggie hit last, cleaner, tighter, already scanning. All systems degraded but functional. Nav's lying. "We're running on confident guesswork." Ava nodded once.
"Let's move."
They collapsed chutes fast, fingers numb even through heated gloves. Snow buried everything within seconds, wiping away proof they'd been there.
The storm didn't care.
They pushed forward into it, heads down, bodies angled against the wind. The terrain rose and fell beneath the white rock teeth hidden under powder, ice-slick inclines waiting to break ankles. Every step was a negotiation. Every breath tasted like metal. The facility emerged gradually. Not a structure so much as a decision the landscape made under duress. Dark geometry bled out of the white, low brutal shapes sunk into the earth, their angles too deliberate to belong to nature. No lights. No warmth.
Just concrete and silence squatting in the snow.
Jess slowed.
"Are we sure it's not abandoned?" "No," Maggie said softly. "It's pretending to be dormant."
Ava felt the pressure, the sense of being assessed without being seen. The systems were waking up while the storm howled around them.
They slowed without needing to say a word.
Up close, the facility was worse. Old-world Russian brutality shaped the bones, thick concrete poured without elegance, angles chosen for function and fear. No windows. No concessions.
Nothing to look at but snow. And it kept out the cold, to a certain extent.
It was the kind of architecture that assumed people inside would not be leaving in one piece, if at all. Frost had chewed at the surface for decades, cracking seams and exposing rebar. Repairs had been made, but never to soften it. Just enough to keep it functional. New tech clung to it like scar tissue. Sensor clusters were embedded along the outer edge of the berm. Cable runs half buried in ice. Antenna spines rose from the roofline, slim and modern, whispering to satellites that pretended this place didn't exist. Heat vents breathed intermittently, exhaling faint ghosts into the storm before swallowing them back again. Ava raised a fist. They halted. The perimeter wasn't marked by fences or signs.
It didn't need to be.
The snow around the facility lay wrong, too smooth in places, too evenly drifted. Tracks didn't linger. Wind patterns bent subtly away, as if the air itself preferred not to touch the structure.
"Kill zone," Jess murmured. "Every flavor." "Layered," Maggie said, eyes flicking between feeds. "Old-school ground sensors under the snow. Pressure, vibration.
Probably analog.
Makes it harder to spoof.
The newer stuff is riding on top, thermal, motion prediction, pattern recognition. All the fun stuff." Ava studied the slope ahead.
"Blind spots."
Maggie shook her head. "Dead zones, not blind ones. They're intentional funnel points." Jess huffed.
"So if we go quiet, we die slow. If we go loud, we die loud," Maggie finished. "At least we'll go out with a bang."
Ava nodded.
The place wasn't built to repel intruders quickly. It was built to hold them.
To identify, isolate, and grind them down while the paperwork caught up. Slow death was policy. They moved again, spacing out, steps measured. Ava picked the line, avoiding the obvious paths, skirting the uneven ground where the snow lay thin over rock. Every meter felt watched, though nothing moved.
Her HUD pulsed once.
Then again. Maggie's voice came tight over the comms.
Heads up. Passive scan just tickled us.
Jess froze mid-step.
Tickled how? Like it knows something warm and stupid is nearby but hasn't decided whether to care yet, Maggie said.
Ava lowered herself, palm brushing the snow. It vibrated faintly, not because of movement, but because something was activating beneath it.
Can you keep it busy?
Ava asked.
Maybe, Maggie said. But this system's stubborn.
Human-supervised logic.
It doesn't like being contradicted. That was when the storm changed.
The wind shifted, slicing sideways instead of straight on, peeling snow from the ground in sudden sheets. Visibility collapsed again, but this time it felt directed, as though someone had drawn a curtain. Jess swore.
That's not normal weather. No, Maggie said. That's perimeter response.
Environmental masking. Ava's HUD flashed amber. Then red. A tone cut through the comms, low, resonant, not an alarm so much as an announcement. Perimeter status, anomaly detected. The words appeared in Russian first. Then English. Then vanished.
Contact without actual contact, Jess said. I hate it when they do that.
Ava was already moving.
Positions. They spread, instinct snapping tight.
Snow erupted nearby, not an explosion but a precise plume as something beneath the surface shifted. Maggie's breath hissed.
Ground sensors just woke up. They're triangulating. Not firing yet. Why not?
Jess asked.
Because it hasn't classified us yet, Maggie said. Are we animals, debris, or people?
Ava raised her rifle, scanning the facility facade. Somewhere behind that concrete, someone or something was watching the feed scroll, waiting for certainty.
The tone sounded again. Closer this time.
Louder. Identify. The snow beneath Jess's boot hardened instantly, ice blooming outward in a precise circle.
Ah, Jess said lightly. Guys.
The perimeter had made its choice. And it was done pretending to be dormant. Snow churned ahead of them, sudden and violent, a vanguard for armored vehicles. Tracked carriers punched through the white, outlines resolving into blunt armored shapes. Headlights cut low and wide, deliberately blinding them. Silhouettes moved behind the glare, men in heavy winter kit, rifles down but ready, their optics glowing faintly red. Almost demonic. A voice boomed out in Russian, amplified and distorted by the wind. Stop. Lie down. Hands visible. Jess shifted her weight instinctively, fingers tightening on her grip.
Say the word.
Ava didn't look at her as she lifted one hand, and then the other.
She went to her knees. Fuck, Jess muttered as she complied. You really know how to ruin my fun.
Maggie froze, then followed, controlled and deliberate. 3 figures kneeling in the snow, weapons set down carefully, movements compliant without being clumsy. Ava tilted her helmet just enough to catch Maggie's eye, and tapped twice against the side of her visor. Delay.
Not deny. Then she reached up and unsealed her helmet.
Cold slammed into her face, brutal and immediate.
She welcomed it. Let it make her look tired. Let it make her look human and fragile. We lost our vector, Ava called out, English first, then Russian, accent clean, unforced.
It almost felt strange to be speaking the language of her childhood, her family.
The storm took out our transport.
We've been walking for hours. Where are we? Can you help us get home?
That got a reaction. Not sympathy but interest.
The guards advanced in a loose arc, boots crunching, weapons tracking but not raised. Their gear was a mismatched marriage of eras, modern optics bolted onto armor that had seen other winters and other regimes.
Probably handed down from other officers before them.
One of them gestured sharply.
Do not move.
Jess spread her hands wider, exaggerated the shiver running through her.
Wasn't planning on it.
You guys have coffee in there. Maybe something a little stronger.
Or do we just keep freezing?
A rifle butt cracked against the snow inches from her knee.
Silence.
Ava didn't intervene. She let Jess be dismissed as a mouthy American. While Maggie looked small, shoulders hunched, fingers visibly stiff from the cold.
She stayed calm.
Boring. A scanner swept over them, thermal, then something deeper. Ava felt the hum through the snow and ice. Maggie's breath fogged sharply. Ava didn't look at her, but she saw the micro-tilt of Maggie's head. Scan incomplete. Holding. Good. The lead guard spoke again, slower now.
Identification.
Ava shook her head.
Gone.
We had it on the aircraft.
Close enough.
The guard paused, considering them, while the wind screamed and snow filled the silence.
You will come with us, he finally commanded.
Jess opened her mouth. Ava beat her to it.
Thank you.
Jess snapped her jaw shut, shooting Ava a look that promised words later. Ava gave her a single glance in return.
Trust me.
They were cuffed, not too tight, not too rough. The zip restraints were rated for compliance, not combat. Their weapons were tagged and bagged but not disassembled. It was efficient and procedural. They were bureaucrats in uniform, not combat soldiers. Exactly what Ava had hoped for. As they were hauled to their feet, Maggie stumbled deliberately.
Just enough to sell it.
A guard cursed and grabbed her arm. Maggie winced.
Sorry, she muttered. My hands are numb.
Ava caught Maggie's eye again, as they were pushed toward the carrier.
She tapped her visor once. Clock's running.
The ramp closed behind them, with a heavy metallic finality. Heat rushed in, not warmth, not really.
Just a little less cold.
Jess leaned close, voice barely audible.
You realize this is the worst idea you've ever had.
Ava stared straight ahead as the vehicle lurched into motion.
No, she said quietly. It's the quietest. Outside, the storm swallowed their tracks.
Inside, the facility waited, confident, patient, already filing them under solve.
That was its mistake.
The carrier shuddered to a halt. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the rear ramp lowered with a hydraulic sigh, letting in a slab of light that was too white, too clean to belong to the storm outside.
Move, a guard ordered.
They were marched out into a corridor carved straight through the earth.
Not steel, concrete.
Thick, poured, scarred by decades of freeze-thaw and retrofitted just enough to stay useful. Old Soviet brutalism reinforced with newer materials that didn't quite match, seams visible where eras collided. The air was warmer than outside.
That made it worse.
Moisture clung to everything, condensation slicking the walls, pooling under boots. Pipes ran overhead, some insulated, some naked and rimmed with ice where heat loss hadn't been worth correcting. Cameras watched from recessed housings, lenses old, feeds new. Jess rolled her shoulders subtly.
Smells like a basement that eats people.
A guard shot her a look. Jess ignored him. They were herded into a processing chamber barely larger than the carrier itself. Floor drains. A single bench bolted to the wall. Scanning pylons rising like gravestones from the concrete.
This was where people became records to be lost and forgotten. Stand apart, the lead guard ordered.
They complied. For now. Restraints were cut, replaced immediately with magnetic cuffs keyed to the room. Ava noted the wait, the delay between command and confirmation. Old system. Manual verification, layered over automation. Good. A scanner arm descended, humming softly as it swept Ava first, thermal, biometric, skeletal. The sensation was invasive but impersonal, like being measured rather than searched.
Her HUD flickered, so did Maggie's. Jess said mildly as her own scan began. Just so we're clear, I'm allergic to needles, confinement, and authoritarian architecture.
No one laughed. The device paused at Maggie. Just a fraction too long. Ava watched Maggie's posture tighten, not panic or fear. Calculation. Numbers streamed across Ava's peripheral vision, then stuttered. A checksum failed. Retried. Failed again. The system didn't escalate. It hesitated. Maggie exhaled, slow and controlled, as if steadying herself against the cold. In reality, she was threading poison through the gaps, introducing noise where certainty should have been. Not falsifying data. Just softening it. The scanner completed its cycle with a dull chime. The guard frowned at his console. Inconsistent readings. "Remove helmets," the guard ordered. Ava didn't move immediately. She tilted her head, letting fatigue show. "If we take them off too fast, we're going to lose heat. We've already got one hypothermic baseline in the room." The scanner hummed again, as if considering the suggestion. Maggie coughed, sharp wet. "I'm fine," she said a little too quickly. Then softer, "just dizzy." The guard hesitated. That hesitation was everything. Ava met his gaze calmly. "We've been exposed to sub-zero conditions for hours. Our baselines are unreliable." "Accurate enough." The guard considered, then grunted. "Secondary processing. Not good." They were moved again, deeper into the facility. Corridors narrowing, ceilings lowering. The building pressed in, intentional and absolute. Every turn felt designed to make people forget how far they'd come, or how far they still had to go. Jess leaned closer to Ava as they walked. "How much longer?" Ava didn't answer immediately. She watched a camera swivel to follow them, its movement slightly delayed. "Not much," she said finally. "They're deciding whether we're worth keeping." Maggie's voice came tight but steady over the short-range comms. "Deep scans next. If it finishes, it'll reconcile the anomalies." "And then?" Jess asked. "And then it'll realize we don't belong anywhere, that it can explain." They were brought to a halt outside a reinforced door. Frost rimmed its edges despite the interior heat, metal contracting and expanding with soft, unhappy sounds. A placard beside it read simply, "Intake Level 2." The guard keyed the panel. The door began to open. Inside the facility, the system prepared to reconcile its ghosts. Chapter 3: The Asset. Humans are not data. The steel door slowly opened. It was designed to keep people in, not warmth. Maggie took stock of the lock mechanisms, while Jess calculated breach time and ammo. What caught Ava off guard was that it didn't open into another corridor, but onto frigid open air. She stepped forward following the guard, and the space dropped away beneath her boots. Steel grated underfoot, vibrating faintly with the weight of the structure. A catwalk stretched ahead, bolted into the concrete ribs of a cavern carved straight down into the earth. Cold air rose from below, stale and damp, carrying the layered smells of bodies, disinfectant and something older, rust and resignation. Below them, the facility's forgotten breathed. Inmates moved across the open floor in loose, unstructured patterns. No cells. Just low partitions, concrete pillars, shadowed recesses that suggested assigned zones rather than privacy. Blue uniforms marked them as state property. Not prison orange. Not military gray. Bureaucratic blue chosen to fade. Some walked slow circuits. Some sat with their backs to the walls, staring at nothing. A few clustered in quiet knots, heads bent close, voices swallowed by distance and the constant hum of ventilation. Guards ringed the perimeter at ground level and watched from glassed-in booths above, weapons present but idle. Control without urgency. Ava understood it immediately. Even if anyone made it past the systems, past the guards, past the concrete, there was nowhere to go. The cold would finish the job. These weren't monsters. They weren't soldiers. They were people who knew things. People who couldn't be erased cleanly. So they were stored.
Jess let out a low whistle. Well, that's cheerful.
Eyes forward, a guard snapped in perfect but accented English, but his own gaze flicked downward, checking the floor like a shepherd counting sheep. Ava barely heard them. She was already mapping the space, sightlines, camera coverage, the rhythm of patrols. The catwalk formed a squared horseshoe around the chamber, feeding into multiple exits at different levels. Processing throughput. Built to move bodies efficiently, while reminding them exactly where they stood. Above. Below. The system liked hierarchies. She scanned faces out of habit, wondering which of those faces belonged to the asset, and calculating how to weed through them and find the one they were there to extract. Old men. Younger ones already bent. Their skin was grayed by artificial light, their eyes dulled not by age but by waiting. Some looked up as the trio passed overhead, curiosity flickering. New arrivals weren't a common occurrence. Eyes tracked their every movement. Then she saw a profile. Just a slice of it, half obscured by a concrete pillar and the shoulder of another inmate. A man standing still while the rest of the floor shifted around him. Head angled slightly downward, posture controlled despite the sag of exhaustion.
It was his nose that caught her attention.
Straight. Strong bridge. A faint asymmetry where it had once been broken and set badly. Ava felt the recognition like a punch to the sternum.
She slowed half a step.
Covered it by adjusting her balance against the cuff's weight.
The man turned his head. Not fully but just enough.
The jawline was all too familiar. The mouth held tension in the same place hers did when she was thinking too hard. Grey threaded through his hair now, more than she remembered from her childhood. Her father stood among the waiting dead, wearing faded blue. For a heartbeat the world narrowed to that single figure below her. All the noise fell away, the guards, the ventilation, Jess's muttered commentary. Ava's HUD flickered, catching the spike in her vitals and smoothing it down before it could register as an anomaly.
He didn't look up. Of course he didn't. Even if he had, he wouldn't have known her. Not like this.
Not behind the visor, face hidden, posture rewritten by armor and restraint.
She was a shape above him.
Another anonymous problem passing overhead. He shifted his weight, rubbing his wrists absently, and Ava's throat tightened. It was the tell she caught herself making, and had to train herself out of.
She had to force herself to keep moving.
Maggie brushed past her shoulder as the guards urged them forward. Ava felt it in the subtle tension of her body, the unspoken question in Maggie's posture, the awareness that something had changed. Jess was too busy scowling at a guard to notice.
If she noticed, her instinct would be to blow something up. And they couldn't risk explosions yet.
Soon.
Not yet.
The catwalk sloped downward toward an enclosed section at the far end of the chamber. Doors waited there. Heavier. Reinforced. Processing within processing. Behind them, the general population floor swallowed her father back into its slow, grinding orbit. Ava tapped her cuff once. Then again. Get ready. The guards stopped them beneath a bank of recessed lights that hummed with a tired, electrical patience. The catwalk narrowed here, funneling them toward a reinforced threshold set into the concrete wall. Beyond it, Ava could see another scanning frame waiting. Taller. More invasive.
Helmets, the lead guard said again.
This time he didn't bother raising his voice.
He didn't need to.
Ava felt the weight of the moment settle. She lifted her hands slowly, fingers stiff with cold, and reached for the seals at her jaw.
The helmet disengaged with a soft pneumatic sigh, far too loud in the open space.
Cold air hit her skin immediately, damp, recycled.
It crawled into her lungs and stayed there.
Her breath fogged once, then steadied. Across from her, Maggie followed suit, movements careful, deliberate. Her face was pale but composed, eyes already tracking the scanner's idle sweep. Jess went last, tugging the helmet free with less patience and letting it hang from one hand.
Happy now?
Jess muttered. A guard ignored her and keyed the scanner. Below them, the gen pop shifted. Ava felt it before she saw it, the subtle change in the room's rhythm. Heads lifting. Bodies pausing mid-motion. New faces always drew attention. Faces without helmets even more so.
She didn't look down. She couldn't afford to.
The scanner swept her again, light crawling across her exposed features, bone structure, micro-expressions, skin temperature.
It lingered on her face longer than before. On the floor below, a man stopped walking.
Ava saw it in her peripheral vision, a hesitation in the flow of bodies, a disruption in the slow, institutional orbit. Someone had gone still.
Her father looked up. Not all at once.
Just a fraction.
As if something had tugged at his awareness without explanation.
His gaze climbed the catwalk, unfocused at first, then sharpening as it found the cluster of guards, the prisoners, her. Recognition didn't land cleanly. Confusion came first. A narrowing of the eyes. A slight tilt of the head, testing a thought he didn't trust yet. Ava kept her face neutral. Empty. Just another detainee being processed. The scanner chimed.
Face confirmed, the guard said, checking his console. No active matches.
Maggie kept their records clear at all times. Just in case. Her father took a half step forward below. A guard on the floor barked something sharp in Russian and shoved him back into place.
He didn't resist.
He'd always been an intelligent man.
He knew how to bide his time.
Retribution for him had always been precise and surgical. He taught her to assess every situation with cold calculation. Never strike out of anger. Never without gain.
But his eyes didn't leave her.
She inclined her head just enough to catch Maggie's eye and tapped her cuff once. Now. Chapter 4: Extraction. Alive means complicated.
The tap barely registered.
Too soft for a human ear to flag, but the system noticed it anyway. Maggie felt the shift before she saw it. A soft tightening in the room's data flow. The scanner, which just cleared Ava, rerouted a fraction of its processing power inward, away from the detainees and into internal reconciliation. Hunting anomalies. Cross-checking archival records no one expected to be touched again. Maggie let her shoulders sag, and her breathing hitch, playing into the hypothermia narrative Ava had sold. Hidden beneath it, her fingers were already moving, nudging permissions sideways, riding the system's uncertainty. Asking questions it didn't like answering, while Jess stepped between her and the guards, blocking the movement of Maggie's fingers on the hidden wrist unit. Who was processed before the purge? Who didn't get a face? Who was important enough to be filed early and buried later?
And then the date locked in.
Along with a prisoner number. Maggie flashed the information to Ava under the guard's nose.
What the fuck is taking you so long?
Jess groaned.
We're cold and hungry and lost.
We're not your fucking prisoners.
Can't you just give us a ride to the closest base or something?
Last I checked, we're not enemy combatants or working for competing companies, so none of this shit is necessary. Your system hasn't flagged us, has it? While Jess held the guard's attention, Ava checked the data. Same intake window she'd flagged on the VTOL, the one that had felt wrong without her being able to name why. The prisoner number sat beneath it. Ava's gaze dropped to the Genpop floor. He was still watching her, his eyes were clear and calculating.
Her jaw tightened.
Just a fraction.
That's our asset, Maggie whispered. He went in early.
Before the scrub protocols. Before the behavioral research overlays.
That's why the file's thin.
She let that sit for half a second before continuing.
They didn't erase him. Not completely anyway. The system couldn't afford to.
They repurposed him. Ava tore her gaze from her father, and a prisoner number stamped across his chest.
Are you saying this place was built around him?
Maggie exhaled.
I'm saying the asset isn't just an inmate. He's part of the infrastructure.
Another pause. Her breathing stayed measured, but her eyes burned bright.
He's who it was built to contain.
A guard stepped closer to Jess, patience finally spent.
Silence, he snapped.
Jess smiled at him. Slow but entirely without warmth.
See, she said. That tone right there is why people don't like you.
You clearly haven't been laid in a while. The guard's jaw tightened. He turned sharply away, barking something into his common Russian. Orders flowed back just as quickly, clipped, procedural board.
Move them, he said. Holding floor.
Not isolation or containment.
They were being parked.
The guards took their arms, not rough but not gentle either. They were efficient as they steered them toward a grated stairwell cut into the side of the chamber. As they descended, the noise from below grew louder, voices, shuffling boots, the low murmur of too many people with nowhere to go.
The smell hit first. Human density.
Sweat trapped under synthetic fabric. Disinfectant layered thick enough to burn the sinuses. Beneath it all, something metallic and old, fear that had settled into the concrete and never left. The final gate buzzed and slid aside. Inside, the guard ordered as they were shoved through the gates leading to the Genpop floor. No ceremony. No announcement. Just 3 more bodies, folded into the slow churn of the forgotten. The guards stepped back immediately, sealing the barrier behind them with a hydraulic clunk. Their weapons stayed lowered, and their eyes tracked without urgency. Once people crossed this line, they stopped being variables.
They became static.
Ava let her posture sag.
Let the cuffs pull her shoulders forward.
She felt Maggie do the same beside her, the performance snapping back into place seamlessly. Jess, infuriatingly, looked right at home. The space closed in around them. Faded blue uniforms brushed past. Some inmates barely glanced up, new arrivals were rare but not unheard of. Others stared openly now, curiosity sharpening into interest. Whispers threaded the air, rippling outward faster than any alarm. Ava didn't scan the room.
She didn't need to. He was already heading towards them.
He was close enough that she could see the lines carved deeper into his face, the grey stubble shadowing his jaw. He was thinner than she remembered, but he still carried himself with military efficiency. Every movement was measured and contained. She noticed how his eyes flicked not just at her but at Maggie, at Jess, at the sealed door behind them. Assessing. Always assessing. He stepped out of the slow orbit of bodies and stopped directly in front of her. For a heartbeat, neither of them spoke.
Then very quietly, without looking at her, he said, "You took your time."
He spoke in barely accented English. The language he'd insisted they speak to each other so she could be fluent in both English and Russian, as though she was born to both worlds. Ava swallowed once. Kept her voice level.
"They said you were dead."
A ghost of a smile touched his mouth. Gone as quickly as it came.
"I'm sure they wished I was."
Around them, movement shifted. Men drifted closer, not crowding, not threatening.
They simply adjusted their positions.
Waiting. One leaned against a concrete pillar, arms folded. Another crouched near a vent, fingers absently rubbing something chalky between thumb and forefinger. A third met Jess's eyes and gave her a barely perceptible nod.
Jess clocked it instantly and grinned. "Well," she said, glancing around. "Would you look at that?
Family reunion and a welcoming committee.
I feel so special."
The man who taught Ava everything she knew finally lifted his gaze fully to her face.
Up close, the resemblance was undeniable.
Same eyes. Same stillness when the world got dangerous.
"You brought friends," he said.
Ava met his stare.
"So did you."
Somewhere above them, the system continued its reconciliation, slow, procedural, already a step behind.
On the floor, patience ran out.
And in the concrete belly of the facility, the waiting dead began, very carefully, to reposition.
Left side, he said quietly as his eyes tracked the guards above. Third pillar.
Vent cover's loose. Don't stand near it. Jess blinked once,
then smiled as though she'd just been given a gift. You hear that? She murmured. I like him.
Ava watched her father tracking the guards, memorizing every movement he made.
You ready? She asked. When have I ever not been ready? He asked. I've simply been waiting to see who came through the door.
Around them the floor shifted.
Not a rush. Not a riot.
Just subtle repositioning, men drifting into places they'd clearly memorized. Ava's father stood in the center of it all, directing it the way he had countless battles in war and in corporate takeovers. He nodded and Ava's gut clenched.
This wasn't what she'd planned, but her father had trained her to be adaptable under any circumstances.
Jess grinned while Maggie tapped on her wrist deck.
I've got a service spine maintenance grade, Maggie murmured. Old.
Analog handshake. If I push, it'll open 3 doors and ask forgiveness later. Do it, Ava said just as a concussive thump folded the air instead of shattering it. The vent cover tore free, ice and steam vomiting into the chamber. Alarms hesitated, half a second of indecision that cost the system everything. Maggie pushed, using the inmate's distraction. Locks clattered open down the line. Somewhere above a guard shouted, and a rifle discharged into nothing. Jess stood, smoke curling around her.
Okay, she said. Now we're having fun.
Ava's father stepped in beside her, calm as ever amid the chaos.
Follow me, he said. They never finished upgrading the east corridor.
Maggie checked her wrist deck and nodded confirmation.
He's right. It's our best way out.
The facility had built itself to contain the waiting dead, but had forgotten what would happen when they remembered how to move.
And for the first time in a very long time, the system was irreversibly behind.
Chapter 5, After Ice. Survival doesn't equal freedom. Another explosion rocked the floor as guards thundered down the stairs and through the gates. Jess tore a length of piping free from a maintenance rack and drove it into the nearest guard's knee.
The crunch was wet and final.
He went down screaming. She ripped his weapon free and tossed it to one of the waiting men, then pivoted and dropped a second guard, taking his rifle as he fell. Ava disarmed a guard as he stumbled past, wrenching the rifle free. Maggie already had one by the time Ava looked back. Ava's father didn't shout. Didn't issue orders. His people already knew what to do. He cut left without breaking stride, boots finding the narrow seam in the floor where the corridor plating changed. The corridor hadn't been finished, for whatever reason. Perhaps the facility had forgotten the expansion, or it had simply stopped caring.
It didn't matter. What did matter was that there were no cameras or smart lighting.
Just concrete, conduit, and an old hum in the walls that didn't quite belong to anything anymore. Behind them, the facility tore itself apart. Gunfire echoed in short, panicked bursts, swallowed by alarms that couldn't agree on a priority. Someone screamed. Someone else didn't get the chance. The noise blurred into a single rising pressure that chased them. Ava didn't look back. She didn't need to see it to know what was happening behind them. The men who had shifted so carefully into place weren't trying to win. They were buying time. Time for a door to open. Time for ghosts to move through walls that couldn't hold them anymore. Some of them would die for it. Most of them already had. Jess took the rear, the scavenged weapon ready and waiting, her movements loose and vicious as she fired once, twice, then slammed the corridor control panel with the butt of the rifle as they passed. Sparks fountained. The lights overhead flickered and died. 10 seconds, Maggie said, already running diagnostics on her wrist deck.
Then they reroute pursuit. Then it gets messy. It's already messy, Jess said, as another explosion thudded somewhere above them, close enough to rattle dust from the ceiling.
Ava's father didn't slow.
They won't follow in force, he said. Not yet.
Ava glanced at him.
Why?
Because they don't know who or what we are, he replied.
And the system hates uncertainty.
The corridor ended in a blast door set into raw stone. No corporate finish. No insignia. Just a pressure lock scarred with old impact marks, and a manual override that looked like it hadn't been touched in years. Ava slowed half a step despite herself.
That's not an exit, Maggie said quietly.
Ava's father shook his head once.
No.
Maggie crouched, running her scanner along the seam.
It's wired like one, she said. But it's behaving like containment.
The delay was subtle, a fraction too long between ping and response.
A hesitation that the system hadn't shown anywhere else.
Maggie exhaled.
Isn't that lovely? Don't you just love traps? Your friends are interesting, Ava's father said with a slight smile.
Maggie dropped to her knees, fingers flying.
Oh, that's rude, she muttered.
Analog lock married to a digital leash. If I get it wrong, it seals and vents the tunnel. Jess leaned against the wall, weapon trained back the way they'd come.
No pressure.
Boots thundered somewhere behind them.
Closer now.
The system had finally caught their scent. Maggie inhaled, then pushed. The lock screamed. Not an alarm, something older. Metal shifted as bolts disengaged.
The door began to open. Jane, Ava said, already bringing up the comm.
Static. In a voice tight and controlled.
You have the asset, Jane said. It wasn't a question.
Ava watched her father step into the dark, his silhouette swallowed by the tunnel beyond.
We do. Client is inbound, Jane continued. Rendezvous at the extraction point. They'll take charge from there.
Ava's jaw clenched.
You didn't say the handoff would be immediate.
Static echoed down the comms line for a fraction longer than normal.
I said extraction, Jane replied. Not custody.
The door shuddered. Maggie swore.
60 seconds before it closes.
Ava cut the feed and followed her father into the tunnel. Behind them the riot roared. Ahead the dark waited. Cold air rushed up to meet them, sharp and alive. The tunnel sloped downward, rough-hewn and narrow, walls sweating meltwater that froze in rivulets along the floor. Her father moved ahead of them without hesitation, bootsteps sure, pace unhurried. He knew this place.
Or places like it.
The kind built by people who believed concrete and protocols could outthink human will. They emerged into a wider cavern where the tunnel broke open into an old service bay, carved directly into the ice. Structural pylons rose like ribs. Frost hung thick in the air. 2 VTOLs idled on a scorched pad, engines whining low and predatory, one hull stamped with a corporate insignia Ava didn't recognize. The other was the one they'd jumped out of, only a few hours ago.
He stopped, just for a moment.
Then he exhaled through his nose, almost amused.
So, he said quietly. They finally sent a courier, instead of an execution order. How did you know where the extraction point was?
Ava asked, staring at her father, memorizing every frown line, gesture and glance.
He simply smiled.
A figure stepped out from beneath the VTOL's wing, coat insulated, face bare despite the cold. He was confident and unarmed in the way only people with too much leverage and power ever are.
Dr. Mikhail Sokolov, the client said, voice smooth, American accent.
The kind of voice shaped by Ivy League halls, back when education still tolerated independent thought.
You've been difficult to retrieve.
Ava felt it lock into place. His name. The one she'd been forced to leave behind and pretend never existed.
The weight of it.
The missing years.
Her father didn't look at the client. He looked at her. I've been a number for so many years, he said gently. It's strange to hear the name they tried to bury, especially from someone who helped bury it.
Ava's throat tightened as she looked at the number emblazoned on his prison uniform, the same number Maggie had retrieved from the system, flagging him as the asset.
The client smiled thinly. You belong to us now.
Mikhail finally turned his gaze to them, assessing the VTOL, the personnel, the exits. Calculating. Always calculating. He leaned closer to Ava, voice pitched so only she could hear.
"I'll see you soon, Kotak," he said with a soft smile. "I'm not a kitten anymore," she said. "I stopped being one the moment you disappeared." "I know," he said as he glanced at the American. "Once I've dealt with Mr. Fletcher, I hope I'll be able to get to know the woman you've become."
He met her eyes, steady, certain. The same look he'd worn her entire childhood, when the world had been sharp and dangerous and he'd still believed preparation mattered. Fletcher cleared his throat.
"We should move.
Before the facility recovers." Mikhail straightened and took one deliberate step toward the VTOL. Then he paused, just long enough to give Ava the barest nod.
The closest he would get to saying goodbye, for now.
The engine spooled higher. Maggie swore under her breath.
"Ava." "Go," Ava said. "He'll be fine."
"And if he isn't, I know who to hold accountable." The daughters peeled back, heading toward their own VTOL, as Fletcher's craft, marked with that unfamiliar insignia, lifted into the whiteout above. They were airborne minutes later, punching through cloud and snow. No one spoke. Then Maggie's console chimed once.
She frowned. "That's weird."
"What?" Jess asked. Maggie brought the channel up. Mikhail Sokolov's calm voice filled the cabin.
"No matter what happens, you will always be my little Kotek, and I am proud of the woman you have become.
Fletcher was smart enough to hire you to extract me.
Not smart enough to hold me without you."
A pause.
"There are many men like Fletcher who want to keep me contained or dead. That is their mistake."
"I will never be contained again." Jess barked a laugh.
"I knew I liked him."
Maggie shook her head in awe.
"He ghosted a corporate extraction team in under 10 minutes. No wonder he managed to get through my systems."
Ava closed her eyes briefly, breath easing out of her chest.
"Where are you?" she asked. A hint of warmth crept into his voice. "Somewhere cold," he said. "Somewhere temporary.
Give Jane my regards." The comm cut. Ava stared out at the endless ice. Somewhere out there her father was doing what he'd taught her to do, survive first and settle the score later. When he was ready, he would rewrite the system that had tried to bury him. Survival wasn't freedom, but it was leverage. Something the system buried is moving again, but the Daughters of Iron don't look back. The next mission is already underway. About the author. Joan de la Haye writes dark and twisted thrillers featuring dangerous women, cold-blooded assassins, and survivors who turn the tables violently. Her stories push boundaries and revel in the kind of justice that doesn't play by the rules. Her characters don't wait for permission, they take control, exact revenge, and refuse to be victims. If you enjoy thrillers with bite, grit, and unapologetically fierce heroines, you've just found your new favorite author. Visit her digital lair at www.joandelahaye.com.